So I'm going to do a quick painting demo for you guys. I have my bucket of paint right here, and I have a few paintbrushes and my cup of water so that I can rinse my paintbrushes when I switch between colors. Painting rag ready to go so I can clean my brush after I've rinsed it. It's also good for if I need to wipe off anything from the canvas, like if I've put the wrong color or too much paint, you just put your finger inside and then you can kind of clean off little parts of it. And then I have the most important part, my palette. I like to work on a glass palette. You can work on things like paper plates or pieces of cardboard. I think when I was a teenager, I used like the jewel case for a CD. If you guys are even old enough to know what that is. But yeah, then I use glass because if you use things like cardboard or a paper plate, it's more porous and dry, so it absorbs the paint and it'll dry out a lot faster. And today I'm painting with acrylic paint, and acrylic paint dries really quickly. If you're working with oil paint, which I won't be today, oil paint takes a lot longer to dry. And there are slow drying and fast drying or just regular drying acrylic paints as well. I don't like to paint with the slow drying kind because it's just a little bit too messy. If I'm going to paint with something that's really slow drying, I'll work with oil. And the reason you want to work with oil and you want something that's drying slow is basically if you like to go in and edit a lot on your paintings, you can remove the paint a lot easier. And then you can put new things in. Or some people are really specific about the color that they want to use. And if you've mixed we'll go over paint mixing. I'll just start now and talk about it while I'm doing it. So I have like a few different types of yellow and a few different types of red. This Prussian blue, that's the really dark one down here. And then white. I was trained not to use black, to just mix your own black, or just like a really dark hue, because oftentimes, excuse me, I'm sick. Oftentimes if you use a straight black in a painting, it doesn't look very natural. Because our eyes don't really ever see anything that's just like a pure black. There's always like a mixture of colors making up the black, if that makes sense at all. So anyway, long story short, I will mix up, I'll make a green. So I take my Prussian blue, and I take some of my yellow. Often it's smarter to start with a light color, like if I pulled from the yellow first. That way I avoid getting that little contamination zone right there, but we'll make it work. So I mix the yellow, I mix the blue, and I have that lovely little green color right there. And then if I feel like that's a little too thick, I'll water it down by dipping my brush into the water, adding a little bit of water to that. Adding water to acrylic is going to help it from drying out, but it also dilutes the paint a lot. So like if I do thick applications of paint, so this is not watered down, this is a good glop of blue and a good glop of that yellow. Glop is the technical term. And then I would apply it to my canvas. It's pretty thick. And then if I water it down, so right now I'm putting my paintbrush in the water. I water it down, You see how it's kind of thinning out there? Almost like watercolor. So that I could get kind of more of this washy look. And water also helps like extend the paint. Like if I went for the gloppy guy, and I went over, see it starts to already kind of run out. It won't cover as much space. If I'm adding water to that gloppy paint though, suddenly it's more viscous, it's more fluid, it can cover a lot more space. But as you'll notice, the color is a lot lighter because the paint is a lot thinner. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the guide of how to mix the paint. The nice thing too about working on a glass palette rather than on paper or cardboard is I can take my rag and I can just wipe it away. That way, I still have a lot of space to keep mixing other colors. Make sure you really wipe it away though, because otherwise, and this could be a good thing, this could be a bad thing, depends on your intention. Because otherwise, I'm so sick, you guys, I'm sorry. Otherwise, the leftover paint pigment will tint whatever color you're mixing next. So like I just made a green. If I were to mix, I'm gonna use a different paintbrush altogether because I don't like when my blue tones mix with my pink tones or my red tones or my yellow tones, and I'm gonna make a pink with a new brush. So I'm gonna mix the white with this nice Elzerian crimson hue. Crimson is basically like a purpley red. It's really purpley. I don't like that so much. So I'm going to mix it with a cadmium red. So now I'm making pink. But if I still had some of this lingering green residue, that will taint this pink. I did a pretty good job wiping it away, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Cool. Now I have this nice little pink color from mixing the white and the red. And let's see, I can apply it thick. Ooh. So if I waited, and it's a really good idea, it just depends on what you want. But usually you would wait for this part, like whatever you're painting on top of, you want to wait for it to dry before you paint something else on top of it. Unless, of course, your intention is to mix. So if I was like, oh, I really like that dark green right there, I want to mix it with some pink. I don't know why you would. But let's go ahead and say you just want that. So you go in here and you can add it. And then that pink's not going to be a pure pink anymore. That pink is going to start to get this kind of murky, kind of green hint to it. I don't know if you guys can see that. You can see the difference between like the pure pink and this pink that got mixed in with the green. Also, when you're painting with white, like white paint will make your pigment a pastel, and that could give it kind of like this chalky quality. Just something to look out for. So yeah, there's a lot of like really intentional choices you have to make when you're painting. This also, to explain a little bit about the canvas, like the surface that I'm painting on. This is canvas that's pre-gessoed, it comes on a roll, and then you cut it off of the roll, and then you can, it's just unstretched. This is an example of a canvas that's been stretched. So you can see the paintings on the front, and then this little wood. It's like basically like a wood picture frame like this, and then you take your painting and you stretch it over the wooden bars, and then you staple it along the back. A lot of artists will stretch their own canvases. They want to make their own canvases. It's a lot cheaper to do it that way. Canvases can be really expensive. If any of you are already familiar with painting and going to paint stores and buying those canvases, they could be upwards of like 30 to 50, hundreds of dollars, depending on how big you go. The bigger you go and the thicker the sides are, this part, like if it's this thick, that's going to be more expensive. If it's thinner, it's less expensive. I think this one was like $1.99 at Target. But yeah, a lot of artists will buy unstretched canvas, and then they cover it in gesso, which is this like white paint basically to make the canvas, because canvas material is just like your bed sheets kind of, but scratchier. It's rough, it's porous. If you try to paint directly onto the canvas, it'll absorb the paint like crazy, and it'll look like it'll bleed out. Like maybe I can do an example. Let's see. So this side, this is ungessoed. So if you were to put paint directly on top of that, it's not really going to be easy to tell since you're working with the camera. But what's happening is it's starting to like absorb that paint, and that could be a problem for you down the road. So that's the unstretched canvas, and here's an example of a painting I'm working on for somebody, where the unstretched canvas has these crease lines, and that's where it will eventually be wrapped around the wooden frame of the canvas. So I like to carve the lines into the underpainting so that I know where the crease is going to be, and then I can work from in there. This is a technique that I use where if I do an underpainting, which is this layer of dark gray paint, I'll apply that first so that the background color is kind of already established. And then I'll take my rag, wrap it around my finger, and I will carve into the wet paint the image that I'm going to try to paint. So right here I have my friend's cat. Cat's name is Mr. Biscuits. He's a good cat. I don't know why I always like to start with the nose. And then I like to paint a little bit on the messier side, and I'm not like a photorealistic painter. We'll cover a little bit about like what that means, but they used to call it, and probably do still, but like really traditionally the word is naturalism. That means you're really going for, like, you want it to look as close to the truth, as close to reality as possible. And then artists like the Impressionists came along and were like, well, you know, we don't really agree. We don't think that it's necessary anymore for everything to have this kind of natural, perfect, photorealistic truth painting. There's a lot of politics behind it too. And we'll cover more of that when we go into our art history segment of this class. And I'm painting from memory. I haven't seen this cat in a long time because of quarantine. But yeah. So when you do an underpainting, you kind of have a better idea generally of where you want your paint to go, so you can start fleshing out a figure. But a lot of painters, you know, myself included sometimes, depending on the project, you will just maybe begin by just going. Like if you've ever done free drawing, where you just sit with a pen and paper and you just start making things up off the top of your head. A lot of painters do that too. There's like a million different ways to approach painting. This one's a little bit more, I don't know, structured. And that might be a little less intimidating, and it also might be like, I know specifically what I want to paint. This person paid me to paint their dog or their kid or their, you know, or I just like really hate Trump and I want to make a painting about that. So there's just so many different ways to approach painting. It's kind of like this really cool lifelong practice to figure out what your particular method and style and message is going to be. Bob Ross probably woke up and was like, today's the day. I'm a landscape painter. He probably painted for like years before he got to that point. I don't know if you guys know who Bob Ross is. He's like a very famous, kind of gimmicky painting instructor from the 80s and 90s, I think. Feel free to correct me if you know. And yeah, I just decided to go with some more like vibrant colors for this cat because, you know, why not? You can capture a lot of personality with color too. Like, if your cat, I don't know why I'm going back to a cat. If you are painting something and you feel like the color of it, you want to abstract it, and like maybe you're doing a portrait of your mother and she really, you know, reminded you of a certain color, maybe you would paint her in that color instead of her natural, whatever, skin tone. Yeah. There's just a million choices, and they're all yours to make, so. I actually really don't like this, and I'm going to paint it. I'm going to repaint it after this tutorial's over. But for the sake of showing you guys, ways that this could be done. Here's this really crappy painting of the cat. Ta-da! Let me give it some eyes. Oh, yeah, that's crazy. The cool thing about an underpainting too that I wanted to kind of illustrate here is that the color gray from the background is still visible in between these thicker brush strokes. So it goes well with the background. And then you don't have to go in afterward and paint a background, which can be like the most difficult part of the painting, is getting the background just right. But yeah, that's my painting tutorial. I'm sorry it was so long, and I'm gonna go clean up now.